G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle, and in today's episode we're going to be doing the range review for the Legio Custodes. So let's get started with the Shield Captain. Quite a few miniatures to go through, so yeah, that's why we're starting now. I think this is actually quite a nice model. I think the tactical rock does nothing for him, but who cares about that? The rest of the pose is quite nice. The facial sculpt is pretty good. The weapon is over the top and ostentatious as the Custodes should be, but I think the simple, elegant curves of the leaf-shaped blade, they look really, really good to me. And the sort of iron halo with the fine filigree, the way it's sort of styled into the sort of back of the armor, yep, all of that is a great choice. And I think it's a good way of making a Custodes look more special, look like a character, without going too far in any one direction and going over the top ostentatious, which is the trap that I think in 30k especially, that characters can fall into, especially Custodes. And I think in 40k, the Grey Knights fall into that trap, which is where, you know, even the most lowly trooper in these armies looks very, very visually flashy. You know, there's a lot going on there visually, and because of that, in order to make a character stand out, they have to dial what's already excessive up to another level. And instead of chasing simplistic ways of doing that, they often, just go bigger with details. Just go, well, let's not have one cloak, let's have 3 cloaks. Something silly like that's what happens. So not seeing them go down that route, I think it's a really nice model. Then we get the Custodian Wardens. So these miniatures are much, much closer to what I always wanted to see in the Custodes range, which is basically because of the sort of designs that they've gone with. They went with the basic Guardians, which we're about to get to, having no cloaks, like that little loincloth type cloak. And all the artwork I used to see of them through all the old trading hard games of the 90s and the early 2000s and stuff, and Visions of Heresy, this is what they looked like. The blades, though, I mean, these are better than the basic guys, but the blades are just too fat and chunky. If you look at the Phoenix weapons of the Emperor's Children, especially the Phoenix Spear, they are supposed to be based upon this design. And they're a crude and less refined version of it. But when you physically see the models, it looks like the exact opposite. The Phoenix Spears, especially on like the Phoenix Terminators, they are gorgeous weapons. These are ugly, fat chunks of plastic. Now the axe version works. The halberd axe version can get away with that big, thick, heavy blade because it's a giant axe. But this one here, it needed to be a blade, I think, much, much closer to this Shield Captain's blade. And this is a problem across many Custodes models where they have these really fat blades, gigantic fat bayonets that are just too chonky. They're too fat a detail. They look like something out of Warcraft. And this whole range tends to look that way because of things like that. But the rest of the miniatures, the choice of armor, obviously, all the Custodes have almost identical armor, but it's a good choice. The helmets with the slightly upgraded Aquila across the brow of the helmet looks really good. And obviously, the main use for these guys is like a Sagittarian Guard and such in 30k. I think overall, they are a fine plastic kit. Then we get to the regular Custodian Guardians, which mixed bag. Okay, the bodies look good. The stances, the poses, all of that kind of thing. The integration of the leather gauntlets, great. They needed that red loincloth, especially if only to break up the gold. There is so much gold on these miniatures, and there's not a lot of other colour in there, which tends to make them a bit boring to look at. The spears, I don't like the spears, obvious reasons. As I stated, the blade is just too thick and chunky for something that's meant to be very refined. Whereas, again, Emperor's Children, they're meant to be the crude version of this weapon. Why do they look so much sleeker and sexier? there are things they could have done differently. The Vexilia is a masterpiece. So I think this is one of the nicest parts that exists across every range of Warhammer. It's just the right amount of Roman-style banner. It's got the little double-headed pommel at the bottom of the shaft of the Vexilia. It has a nice little grip. It's not too over the top. It's not got extra purity seals and extra chains and shit coming off it. It's just very plain. And it's got the two little Besigu shields on there, and then of course it is topped off with a nicely sized, but not crazily over the top, Aquila. And having the little bits of scrollwork and chain hanging off it, they are positioned in such a way that you can cut them off if you so desire. You don't need to cut them off either. But as you can see, it's just a tiny little bit of chain that hangs onto the wingtip. So if you don't want it, you can just slice it off and then just clean them up with a scalpel. No one will ever know it was there. It converts well into many legions, especially the Emperor's Children. And this is a good time to bring up the shield, because the shield also does so. There is one detail that I think is pointless on the shield, and that's the tiny little sort of Maltese cross. Just to the side of the gemstone. And it's a superfluous detail that doesn't need to be there. Personally, for me, I put a tiny little drop of photopolymer resin in there, so 3D printing resin, and then smooth it out, and then stick it in the sun, and then it instantly cures it and fills the hole way easier than green stuffing, such a simple detail, and very easy to clean up. So this sort of model here, this is all a win, and I really like it. Then we get to this, which is a surfboard with a handle. I don't know whose idea this was, but it was a bad idea, and I don't know how many people it went through, and every one of them along the way said, that's cool. This is not cool. It doesn't look right for this game. It needed to be a more traditional longsword. But honestly, having the Storm Bolter looking weapon built into a sword like this, it's grim derp at its finest. And frankly, I think these swords ruin the entire Custodes range to some extent because, well, we have to know the fact that they exist. Yeah. They should have got rid of them. Should have done something else. This sword is just an awful, awful detail, and I will never get behind it. And I still can't comprehend that human beings with a functioning frontal cortex looked at this and said, I think this looks good. But apart from that, I think it's fine. Alright, so the first of the upgrade options, we have the Pyite Spears, very similar to a melter weapon, as I think you can tell from the barrels on the weapons. These actually work a little bit better with this style of Guardian Spear because it's not such a great big chunk of bayonet hanging out the front anymore. It's sort of integrated more into that heavy barrel. I think that look kind of works here, where it might not work elsewhere. Also, I want to point out, they don't do a Solarite Gauntlet or Solarite weapon upgrade for Custodes, which is a very, very strange thing when you consider that it's one of the upgrade weapons that the basic infantry have been able to take throughout the past, or characters can take. They don't make that fist for people, which is a bit strange because, well, they've got things like this, which people don't tend to take a lot of. Which leads into these, the Adrosite Spears, where I think if they'd done them maybe with the axe head on them, for example, that would have looked nicer. But these are fine. These are perfectly serviceable weapon upgrades, and yeah, I think they're not a bad look. I just, again, don't see many of them being used by players. When it comes to the really sort of over-the-top Custodes weaponry, people tend to take it on the characters and the specialist units, not on the basic guys, because it's just sort of wasted there. They're really a chopping close combat unit. Shooting with them is kind of wasting their potential, giving the enemy chance to use reaction against you and such. Yeah, that's just, you don't see them a lot. Then we have the Sagittarian Guards. So these are an upgrade set to the basic guys and are one of my favourite Custodes kits. I think these look really good because having the armour without those little loincloths I think looks bad on the basic guys. But with these guys it works for some reason. I think it's because right across the middle of their body is held this weapon, and this weapon is painted a different colour. Yes, it has gold trim on it and such, but having it slung across the front of their body or held across the front of their body, it breaks them up a lot better. And so it pulls off what couldn't be pulled off on other models. I also like the sort of Pickelhaube style version of the Custodes helmet, where it's got that little spike, very much like the new Mark III kits do. I'm a fan of that spike when it's used appropriately, and I feel that it's used very appropriately here. And one of the units that if I built a 2.0 Custodes force, I would take this unit because I just like the look of them. So, speaking of units I like the look of, my other favourite Custodes unit, the Aqualon Terminators with the Infernus Fire Pikes. Now, as far as I know, because I've never bought any of these, the models come with the Solarite Power Cores, which are like Lightning Core, and they don't come with the Gauntlet. If you want the Gauntlet, you have to go to their sister unit, which is the ones with the Adrathic weaponry. Which, yeah... My personal preference is, I don't think these look very good. And I think in Heresy 1.0, really, their way their weapons performed was not that good. This edition, I haven't had enough exposure to fully form an opinion about these weapons yet. I'm very on the fence with them. I think they have a lot of potential, but I'm not sold. Whereas, again, thinking back to that old artwork, I remember artwork of Aqualon Terminators with these fire pikes from my youth, and that nostalgic part of me says, this is the thing I want in my army, even if template weapons like these fire pikes are awful this edition. So this is another unit that would make its way into any Custodes force I make, just on the strength alone of my nostalgia. But apart from that, they're gorgeous models. Absolutely gorgeous Terminators. They're big, they're bulky, they look like a Terminator. You can see they've got hints of basically everything that's come before, of Cataphracti, of Tartarus, and even maybe something like Saturnine, sort of in the style of those giant pauldrons that they have. I like this unit a lot. And yeah, I kind of want to build a Custodes force just so I can build and paint these, because I think that would be great. And don't forget, these guys are huge. These are 50mm bases. They're on not 40mm bases. These guys would hang over a regular Terminator base. They are that big. The Adrathic guys, on the other hand, the body's gorgeous. Yeah, the weapon I'm 50-50 on. It seems too chunky and clunky for the Custodes. When they've got so many organic shapes and details, having this weapon being so squared off and such has never sat super well with me. That's just my personal taste. I don't think it ruins the models by any stretch of the imagination. I just think I might have designed it differently myself if I was the one who was doing it, and I would potentially convert them. Maybe to something more like the old Space Marine Disintegrator would look pretty cool instead. But yeah. Then we get to the Venatari. So the Venatari are basically an Assault Marine type unit. And at first I was really, really mixed on them, because, like, what's the point of getting rid of bits of their armor? Do they really lose that much flexibility in their original armor? You know, it seems very try-hard going for the bare exposed heads and all the leather and such, but, you know, over time they've grown on me. I'll admit it. I think I've come around to actually liking these designs, and I didn't at first. I do think that the flight stands don't look very good on the models. The way that they've chosen that sort of new 40k style ball mount that leaps up into the air. I think having these guys just with a toe on the base would look perfectly good. For the weapons, this sort of like squared off revolver thing, yeah, it doesn't do an awful lot for me. At least on Custodes it doesn't. It feels like something that would belong to a Legion Moritat, or especially like a rogue trader or a militia general. It doesn't seem like the finest weaponry that, you know, the Imperium has to offer. Like, here's your Blade Runner snub pistol 6-shooter, you know, mate. But the jump pack is one of the coolest jump packs going, I think. It's a really neat design with the eagle's wings that sort of fold around the model. You could almost visualize it being used as like a combat shield. And their little combat shield almost looks like it would be a weapon in and of its own right. So they've grown on me. I quite like this squad. The only model really that I've hated so far in the range is that stupid surfboard sized sword on the basic infantry. That is awful. The Gear Falcon pattern jet bike, still the strongest bikes in Heresy, a crown that they will never lose, I don't think. They are not as strong in 2.0 as they were in 1.0 because there are so many awful bike changes. Because again, the designers have a different route, they want to take the game down, but still, these guys are the only bikes that really retained their usefulness from Heresy 1.0. And I think they look good. In their instance, I think that they probably should have had leg armor again instead of all the exposed cloth and leather. Because you are in a bike and, well, your shins are exposed. You know, they're sort of sticking out to the sides. It just feels like a great way to lose a leg, you know, impacting through a squad of enemies and, you know, lucky blow with a sword or whatever, and now you've lost a leg. So it's not a big issue, though. It doesn't ruin the models in any way, shape, or form. And it's nice to see that, you know, there are so many hallmarks of the Space Marine Scimitar jet bike. Same engine, the same sort of power hoses on the underside, the same sort of cowling and reactor at the back of it. In fact, it's very, very 90% the same as a Space Marine Scimitar jet bike. It's just been upsized for a Custode and has a different front end and sort of shroud, we'll call it, over the top of the engine and such. And the Lance looks great. The Lance with like these little like power clips going on there with the cabling. Yeah, these are a nice looking model. But I don't know that they're nice enough, apart from adding variety, that they would make the list of units that I would definitely include. I think I would definitely include the last three units, the Aqualon Terminators, the Sagittarian, the Venatari. Maybe not the Gear Falcon, though. Alright, Dreadnoughts. The Callidus first. So this version of the Dreadnought is the sword and board. The sword is very similar to those basic guys, but at least it kind of works on a Dreadnought. It's such a big and imposing unit, the Dreadnought, that I think you can pull it off and get away with it. And I like the integration of the flame weapon. That makes a lot more sense than a bolt weapon in the sword, because it's really just you can swing it and just sweep a big burst of flame around as you do so at your enemies. Cool. The shield, also a great place. You can put things like decals and such, and yep, just adds that little bit extra to the miniature. And obviously this has a bunch of conversion fodder potential for other ranges. So a nice model. And then it's got its brother, the Achilles. Now, I prefer the Achilles over the Callidus, personally. Just because of, I don't know, something cool about a Dreadnought, which can actually use its weapons. It can use that spear and the two hands. It's kind of impractical in the scheme of the game, but it works. Now, the blade on the spear doesn't overly work for me. I think the las cannon basically is a poor choice on there, because again, like, how are you firing and aiming this thing accurately? It doesn't seem like it should. There's no, you know, targeting sensors or anything like that sticking out of the weapon. It just seems like they thought it would be a cool look on there, but to me it doesn't make sense practically. I wish the blade was a lot more refined. If the bottom edge of it was about in line of where the filigree ends and it followed more of that contour, I think it would look better size-wise. And I would have loved to have seen two variants of blade. Maybe an axe version, as opposed to just having the spear version. But the spear is just too thick vertically. I think the length of it is good, but the height is just wrong. So if they've just reduced it by 3mm or so, it'd be a much nicer looking weapon. And I did a conversion of an Emperor's Children Dread Daddy. That's exactly what I did. I used parts of this model and I converted it so that it had... I carved huge chunks out of it to turn it into a Phoenix styled spear, and it looked a lot nicer, in personal opinion, of course, than what this does. Overall, though, the Dreadnought is gorgeous. Both of them share the same body, so you know they should be gorgeous models. And then we get to the Teletubby. So the Custodes Telemon Heavy Dreadnought. This is a pretty nice model, and in fact is the basis of many people's Legion, Leviathan, Dreadnought conversions, because it doesn't take an awful lot of cleaning to get rid of any Custodes iconography. The thing is, though, on the tabletop in 2.0, well, let's just say it was overpowered in 1.0, and then they resolved that in 2.0 by making you rarely want to take the thing. Very, very weak comparatively, especially compared to Legion Contemptors. Like, they got brutal 3 power fists. This thing does 1 damage if it hits you with its giant power fists. And that's one of the ways you're advised to run the thing, is with fists. So, yeah, makes no sense to me. But yes, like the other Custodes Dreadnoughts, as a design, gorgeous. It's sleeker and more refined than Imperial Dreadnoughts tend to be, like the Leviathan, the Derrideo, the Contemptor. You know, you can see that this is more advanced technology, and just the size, the silhouette, the painting opportunity it gives you, which really has been poorly utilised in this showcase model here. These giant sort of saturnine pauldrons that it has over the shoulders, they're perfect for a bunch of decals or scripture, things like that, that would really make it feel unique, that can add some colour to the army, some vibrancy, something that's not just red or gold or, you know, whatever other accent colour people have chosen. But again, another lovely model in the range. The Coronus Grav Carrier. Now, for those who haven't seen these before, these are huge. These are physically enormous, Spartan-sized vehicles. And they look pretty good. I think the Custodes vehicles on the whole all look fantastic, so I'll get that out of the way right now. But yeah, these look pretty good. I like the stippling red finish, by the way. Again, the paint is irrelevant, I guess, to these videos. We're reviewing the models themselves, but the stipple red mottled finish looks really, really good on them. The vehicle, it's nice. The proportions are great. The size of the ramp, the weapons, engines, everything's in proportion to what it looks like it should be, considering the Custodes and their range. So, yeah, pretty cool vehicle. Then we've got the Palace Grav Attack. This one I'm a lot more mixed on. I don't feel like I should have an enclosed cockpit like this. It looks very stumpy, almost like this is the front half of a larger vehicle that just got torn off at the back there. It doesn't seem big enough. I think that if it had had an open cockpit with a Custode crew member just physically sitting in there, like a Space Marine land speeder or like a jet bike crewman, that would have looked much better for me personally. This just, yeah, it looks like the 2 engines look right, but the central section looks like the front half of a flyer got just torn off and just glued to them, like a bit of a hack job conversion. And I've seen these in real life before. They're not tiny. These are surprisingly big. They're bigger than a Rhino sized vehicle, closing on the size of a Sicaran battle tank for just square area that they cover on the tabletop. And yeah, I do wish that was a change they'd made. Just have an exposed driver or rider in there, you know, has some sort of force shield protecting him, I don't know, rather than the completely enclosed cockpit here. It just feels wrong. Then we go up to the Callidus Grav Tank. Now, there are 2 versions that I've chosen to include here, and I didn't go through all the weapon types for every unit and vehicle. I could have done it with the Dreadnoughts, for example, but one has the Sicaran style, and this is very much the Sicaran battle tank of the Custodes. It has that Sicaran style turret with the guns slung out to the edges of the round turret, whereas its friend has the weapons slung inboard. And I cannot for the life of me decide which design I like more, because I like them both an awful, awful lot, because both of them work really, really well. I think this design here is the cooler of the 2, entirely down to the fact I think the weapons look cooler. This one, just having sort of minigun barrels, but with a las cannon sort of muzzle brake, I think the barrels are what let it down. The rear of the weapons, like the power cells and the little ventilation systems and all that all looks phenomenal. But the weapon barrels themselves look very uninspired. Whereas on these sort of miniature accelerator cannons, the barrels, they look a lot cooler to me. So if you sort of had the best of both worlds to me, we'll be taking these barrels and putting it onto maybe this body. Maybe that's a 3D kit I can print up or convert up. I'll do an STL for it for people. But yeah, Obviously, didn't speak a lot about the hull here because, well, the hull is just... It feels like the back half of this, where the turret is the missing back half of the Palace Grav tank. So that's where it belongs, you know. It's like one of these gets damaged in combat and the back half gets torn off. So they just keep the front half and you're now a Grav attack tank. But no, gorgeous vehicle design. And if they weren't so damn much for so few units, I would love to own like all these vehicles out of this range. The Orion dropship. Now, these vehicles, the Orion and the sort of Ares sister ship here, they're two different sized vehicles. Let's get that out of the way first. So the Orion's a much bigger flyer. Seen it in person before. Weird rules, weird interactions. I don't know how I feel about it, because on the one hand, it looks like the Imperium vehicles should kind of look like it's not as brutalist, it's definitely more curvy, and it shows the Emperor is taking humanity maybe in that higher tech direction that will end up, you know, being like the Eldar. You know, it's sleeker, more refined, less blocky. But you've got design elements like, you know, it is still kind of square. There's these giant guns just slung underneath, which I don't think work for it. They just seem too crude compared to the rest of the vehicle and how Custodes design elements work. And although they've carried through, the engine pods are mounted on the outside at the far edges like they have on the smaller vehicles. On the smaller vehicles that makes sense because it's like a tank. You're replacing the tracked propulsion with these big grav energy pods that are lifting it up in the air. On this flyer though, this is a Thunderhawk analog. These engine pods are not replacing tracks. They would be replacing the traditional engines of an aircraft, and Imperial aircraft do not have their engines at the edge of the wings. Their engines are attached to the hull. And so I think the misstep here was, and I mean, it's not saying it's ugly, I just think, for me personally, looking at the design aesthetic, it should have had the engine pods integrated into the main hull and then had additional wings that extended beyond that. And it would have looked a bit better. And they probably could have tied in things, you know, a bit more closely together, maybe integrated the weapons better. You know, that would have worked a lot better for me. As it stands, there are some design elements to it that just don't entirely work for me because of that, because it's just too different to other Imperial tech, sticking the engines right at the edge of the wings. The only vehicle engines that are at the very edges of the wings are the little, like, ground thrusters, the things like Valkyries and Vendettas and Storm Ravens and Storm Eagles have. Those little ones that are just maneuvering thrusters to help get off the ground. All the main engines are attached to the hull. These should have been the same. And yeah, those same critiques go for the Ares. But the Ares works better because the Ares has weapons integrated into the design, especially the giant cannon up the front of it. So that giant cannon has all of the sort of power supply located at the back. Yeah, that's cool. That works for me. I think having that sort of hollowed out section with these little like power couplings, and I don't know, it looks kind of like a transformer off a power tower, not transformers in 1980s cartoon or a terrible Michael Bay series. Those look like energy transformers or Tesla coils out of like Red Alert, something like that. And the big just power supply, that works. And it looks like maybe, you know, compromises were made in this design to fit that energy system. But I still think it should have had the propulsion mounted basically at the hull again and had proper wings that went out from there. This thing just looks like it has zero lift, even compared to a Thunderhawk. You know, there's nowhere near the wing or even lifting body to this vehicle. It needed something else. So, yeah. And then to end on a sad note, I end these normally with the Primarchs of the Legions. In this case, we have Constantine Vor, who looks like a cheap whore with the paint job. Just his face looks like he's covered in like makeup. And this model is awful. He's one of the worst models in the entire Heresy range because it's visual diarrhea. The basic building blocks in there, like the pose, that works. The base, that works. Having the cloak, the flaming halo, that works. And you can take any one particular element, like having the rope and the little like baton, scroll, badge of office, whatever he's holding, that would work. Having the dead sort of cyber crow attached on to the shoulder, that might work. So might this dead weird alien lion thing there, that might work. But putting it all into the one package does not work at all. Then you have his weapon. His weapon, it's not the elegant, fine weapon that it feels like it should be. It is this gigantic, huge Eastern European bardish, which for those that aren't aware is like a giant medieval axe head that peasants used. It's a very, very crude weapon, and it's like you take 2 swings of the thing and you're exhausted, because it's just too big a blade on a shaft, right? Because it's designed for a peasant to basically take 1 swing at someone and hopefully connect and land a killing blow. Doesn't work for Veldor. Veldor needed a weapon like all the way back here. It's just a little bit more sleek and refined, you know, something like this. But with every model, you look at like from the basic guys, from their spears, as you go up through the range, the higher up in rank they get, the bigger their blade gets on their weapon. It's just so pathetic way of doing it. If you cut it off, funny enough, about here, where the sort of bolt gun part of the weapon is, if you cut it off there and remove the lower half, it kind of works. It's a lot more size proportionate, and it is kind of sleek. So I feel like to this day there is a gorgeous model buried in here, but it's exactly that. It's just buried. It's like someone just poured their bits box out, a digital bits box, onto this model. And they just kept adding and adding and adding, because some in the back of their brain was saying, you know, or it could have been management. Management might have insisted on it. Just saying to the artist, like, just add more. He needs to look more special. This is the leader of the Custodes. He's very special. And they just kept adding stuff to him because they're like, well, he needs to stand out more. He doesn't stand out enough from the other Custodes. It's like, well, what, he's got a red loincloth. He's got his giant red cloak. He's standing on, you know, the ruins of the Great Pyramid of Giza. You know, at what point do you say he's got enough going on that he stands out from the rest? And yeah, I guess the point is this. And there is this, you don't know where to look on this miniature. And if I was painting this, I'd be terrified. And I don't say that about pretty much anything. I've painted every Primarch. Look at this thing without paint on it. Where do you even begin to pick out what detail is armor, what detail is fur, robe, cloth? It's a mess of a model. There is way too much going on here. And frankly, I think you'd be better off just taking bits of this model. Like take the hand with the little scroll work and stuff. Put that on this guy. Take his weapon and replace it as well with Veldor's. And, you know, start taking bits and pieces of these guys and blending them together, using parts of the basic kits even. And eventually you'll come out with a better model, I think, through kit bashing than by buying this fucking monstrosity. So, personal take there. But I don't know if I've met anyone in person who actually likes Veldor's model, which says a lot. I think the best model in the Custodes force was probably was it Trajan Valoris? I think it was the old man consul who looked like Master Roshi from Dragon Ball Z walking down the set of stairs with the big battle axe halberd, holding his helmet in the hand. That was probably the nicest consul model, level sort of captain that they released to the Custodes. That I wish we had instead. But we got this. Anyway, that's it. That is the Legio Custodes. I don't know if it's worth me doing the Sisters of Silence now or in a separate episode. I'm going to do them at another point in time in any case, so that's why they're not in this one. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode.